All right, here we go. Well, welcome to another edition of Art Brunch, where we explore the wisdom of the arts, spirituality, and the great ideas. I'm going to go ahead and start with the elephant in the room. Most of you are now aware that I had a health scare a week and a half ago. I was hospitalized for a few days. Still trying to get an absolutely clear picture on what happened. That'll happen with a follow-up meeting I have with a doctor, but I am alive and well. Future looks bright, and just got to make a few changes, and things will go smoothly. One of those changes is getting on a medication. Another one of those changes, unfortunately, is a change in diet. But I think most of you are probably familiar with having to adjust your diets for health reasons. But that'll be easy enough. So, so I am good to go. So you're going to have to put up with me for quite a while longer. All right. So here we go. We're going to continue with our series, Beauty in Art and Life. This is part 3. We're dealing with the aesthetic philosophies of the East. These are perhaps perspectives on beauty that we're less familiar with. Today, we're going to explore the artistic traditions of places like India, China, Japan, Korea. Such art traditions have offered the world alternative ways of understanding beauty and meaning and the relationship between art and spiritual cultivation. Now, unlike Western aesthetics, which has often emphasized realism, idealization, and the sublime, Eastern aesthetic philosophy tends towards principles of harmony, emptiness, and impermanence. These philosophical foundations have created artistic traditions that value subtlety over grandeur, value suggestion over explicit representation, and value the cultivation of inner states over external display. The central insight that emerges from this examination is that Eastern aesthetics consistently emphasizes, listen to this, the viewer's inner transformation through aesthetic experience rather than the artwork's external perfection. This approach creates art that functions as a form of spiritual practice, where contemplation of beauty becomes a pathway to wisdom and self-cultivation. Now, what you're looking at here is, of course, a work by a Western artist, Odilon Redon, but Redon was heavily influenced by Eastern traditions of beauty and spirituality. Let's begin our journey with Taoist aesthetics, which is a philosophy emphasizing natural harmony. Taoist aesthetics emerged from the fundamental principle of Wu Wei, and I've included it in red up there. Wu Wei, which refers to effortless action in harmony with natural forces. As Lao Tzu writes in the Tao Te Ching, the Tao does nothing, yet nothing is left undone. This is, of course, a paradox. It suggests that the most powerful actions appear effortless because they align with natural patterns rather than forcing artificial solutions. To put it in different words we might be more familiar with, teaches us to go with the flow. In terms of beauty, Taoist philosophy values spontaneity, naturalness, and the harmonious integration of opposites. The ideal artwork doesn't impose human will upon nature, but reveals the inherent patterns and rhythms of the natural world. This creates a preference for landscapes over portraits, for suggestion over explicit representation, and for empty spaces that allow the viewer's imagination to complete the composition. The Taoist concept of yin-yang provides a framework for understanding aesthetic balance. Rather than producing a static symmetry, Taoist-influenced art seeks dynamic equilibrium, the constant interplay of complementary forces that creates vitality and movement. Dark implies light. Emptiness suggests fullness. Roughness complements smoothness. Let me go back here 1 second. Okay. I'm going to give you another quote from Lao Tzu at the bottom of this work. The sage is guided by what he feels and not by what he sees. Now, I know many modern Western artists would agree with that sentiment. Fan Quan's monumental hanging scroll, Travelers Among Mountains and Streams, is a wonderful example of Taoist aesthetic principles expressing the relationship between humanity and nature. The massive mountain that dominates the composition, you can see it on the left, it dwarfs the tiny figures at the bottom. Perhaps you can see them on the close-up on the right, but if not, I'll zoom in even closer. See the little road, and on the right, you'll see animals. They're being led by two figures. This is illustrating the Taoist teaching that humans should recognize their place within rather than above the natural order. Now notice the waterfall in the middle, flowing into a river. It appears the animals are being led to that river, as we should be led to so-called living waters, spiritual waters. Zooming back out, the painting's composition embodies yin-yang principles through its interplay of solid and void, rough and smooth textures. The mountain's imposing mass, which is the yang, is balanced by misty valleys and empty spaces, which is the yin. Rough rock textures contrast with smooth water surfaces, creating visual rhythm that suggests natural breathing patterns. And Fan Quan's brushwork demonstrates Wu Wei in action. Wu Wei, recall, is the effortless action in harmony with nature. So the painting appears effortless, despite requiring extraordinary technical skill. Individual brushstrokes disappear into larger patterns, just as the Taoist sage acts without leaving traces of forced effort. The artist has become one with his subject, channeling natural forces rather than imposing personal will. Nizan's spare landscape paintings represent the ultimate refinement of Taoist aesthetic principles. His composition reduces landscape to essential elements only. A few trees, distant mountains, and expanses of empty water and sky. This extreme simplicity embodies the Taoist principle that in pursuit of knowledge, every day something is added. In pursuit of wisdom, every day something is dropped. You see, less is more on the journey of wisdom, according to Eastern perspectives. The painting's extensive use of empty space creates what Chinese aesthetics calls pregnant emptiness, voids that pulse with potential meaning rather than mere absence. These empty areas allow the viewers to project their own experiences and emotions into the composition, making each viewing a kind of collaborative creative act between artist and audience. Nizan's dry, spare brushwork appears almost careless, yet achieves profound expressive power through its very restraint. Here's another work, Taoist work that is, reflecting a less is more perspective. The eccentric painter Zhu Da created some of the most psychologically complex expressions of Taoist aesthetics in his animal and bird paintings. His fish paintings, in particular, demonstrate how Taoist principles of spontaneity and naturalness can convey intense emotional states while maintaining a kind of formal simplicity. The fish's large, staring eyes suggest a kind of cosmic awareness, perhaps also a melancholic isolation. The empty spaces around the fish create psychological as well as visual breathing room, allowing viewers to contemplate the creature's inner state. We move now from Taoist to Confucian aesthetics. Confucian philosophies of beauty infuse moral values, arguing that true beauty must serve virtuous purposes and contribute to social harmony. Confucius taught that if artistic forms don't correspond to moral reality, they fail in their essential purpose. This idea of a moral reality sounds a lot like the Platonic idea of the good reflected in art that we examined earlier. In this work, moral advice, make that clear, moral advice is represented. You see, a warm fellowship of three seekers appear to encourage one another on life's journey and comfort one another. The Confucian concept of Wen, W-E-N, refers to arts of peace and encompasses both literary and visual culture, emphasizing art's role in moral education as well as social refinement. Now, unlike Taoist emphasis on natural spontaneity, Confucian aesthetics values cultivation, refinement, and the conscious development of good taste through study of classical models. It's true, it has a kind of elitist and traditional spirit to it, but nonetheless, it's worthy of our attention. And the principle of Zhongyang, the doctrines of the mean, guides Confucian aesthetic judgments. Beauty emerges from balanced portions and moderate expressions, rather than extremes of either severity or indulgence. This creates preference for harmonious compositions, like you see here, refined techniques and subjects that edify rather than merely entertain. Zhao Mengfu's hand scroll represents the Confucian ideal of combining technical excellence with moral cultivation. As both a scholar official and accomplished painter, Zhao embodied the Confucian concept of the cultivated gentleman who excels in multiple areas of learning. In other words, this artist is the Eastern Renaissance man. The work's panoramic scope and careful compositional orchestration, these suggest the ordered harmony that Confucian thought sought to establish in society. Different landscape elements, mountains, trees, rivers, buildings, they maintain their individual character while contributing to the overall unity, much like the social harmony Confucians envisioned. Confucius said, "The superior man in the world does not set his mind either for anything or against anything. What is right, he will follow." The Imperial Painting Academy of the Song Dynasty created works that combine technical excellence with moral symbolism, often depicting subjects that reinforced imperial values and virtues, as well as social stability. Now, these paintings demonstrate Confucian aesthetics through their careful balance of naturalistic observation and moral instruction. Bird and flower paintings, you see one there on the right in particular, often included symbolic meanings related to virtue, loyalty, and proper social relationships. The meticulous technique required for court painting reflects Confucian emphasis on cultivation and refinement. Now, here is another example of court paintings from the Song Dynasty. Take a moment with it. Truly attempt to feel this work, not analyze it, before we move on. Well, now let's move on to Buddhist aesthetics. Buddhist aesthetics emerged from fundamental teachings about the nature of reality, its impermanence, the suffering of reality. It's a natural part of reality, and the non-self. These insights create an aesthetic philosophy that values transient beauty, finds meaning in decay and dissolution, and seeks to awaken compassion through artistic experience. The concept of sunyata, which is emptiness, proves particularly important for understanding Buddhist art. This sunyata, emptiness, doesn't mean nihilistic void, but rather refers to the independent nature of all phenomena. And we are not something solid and static. We kind of flow into the rest of existence. Everything then that exists is in relationship rather than possessing independent essence. Buddhist art often explores this teaching through compositions that emphasize space, suggestion, and the interpenetration of forms. The bodhisattva ideal, that is, the enlightened being who postpones final liberation to help all sentient beings achieve awakening, provides an ethical framework for Buddhist aesthetics. Art should act like a bodhisattva. It should serve not personal expression or social status, but the universal goal of reducing suffering and increasing wisdom. The Ankai Zen Buddhist paintings represent the merging of Buddhist philosophy with Taoist spontaneity, creating works of profound spiritual insight achieved through radical simplification. His portrait of the sixth patriarch demonstrates how Buddhist aesthetics can convey enlightened states through minimal means. The painting's abbreviated brushwork embodies the Zen principle of sudden enlightenment. The idea that awakening occurs in an instant rather than through gradual cultivation. The artist's technique appears almost careless, yet each stroke captures essential character with startling economy. This reflects the Zen teaching that enlightenment involves seeing through conventional appearances to underlying reality. The subject matter of this work, a patriarch engaged in very ordinary labor, illustrates the Buddhist teaching that sacred and secular activities are ultimately non-dual. They're one. Enlightenment manifests in everyday actions, in other words, not just formal meditation. The painting's informal style reinforces this message by treating a religious subject with apparent casualness. This famous Buddhist artist's deceptively simple still life has become one of the most celebrated examples of Buddhist aesthetics in Chinese painting history. Muki's 6 persimmons, painted with varying degrees of definition and tonal weight, create a meditation on impermanence, individuality, and interdependence. Each persimmon possesses distinct character while participating in the compositional whole, illustrating the Buddhist teaching of individual existence within universal interconnectedness. The fruit's varying stages of ripeness suggest the temporal dimension of all phenomena. Each exists in its own moment while participating in universal processes of growth and decay. And once again, we have an extensive use of empty space, creating a contemplative atmosphere that invites prolonged viewing. This pregnant emptiness allows viewers to experience the Buddhist teaching of sunyata, emptiness, directly rather than conceptually. The simple subject matter, stripped of narrative content, focuses attention on the pure act of seeing itself. Here's a wonderful quote from the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form does not differ from emptiness. Emptiness does not differ from form. So ponder this quote a moment as you linger on this work. Japanese aesthetics developed a unique sensitivity to transient beauty, imperfection, and the expressive power of emptiness. The concept of mono no awara, which I've included the bottom right there, it's often translated as the pathos of things. That concept captures the bittersweet awareness of impermanence that runs through Japanese culture. This perspective values moments of ephemeral beauty precisely because they cannot last. Wabi Sabi finds beauty in imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. Unlike Western ideals of eternal perfection, Wabi Sabi aesthetics celebrates the weathered, the asymmetrical, the humble, the decaying. This philosophy emerged from tea ceremony culture and Zen Buddhism, creating distinctively Japanese approaches to beauty that valued process over the final product. Now, this photo is from one of our own, Mike Hamers. Hamers, in particular, among the artists I know, is really talented with seeing the environment with a wabi-sabi sensitivity. Sashu is another famous Zen artist. His splashed inked paintings represent the ultimate refinement of Japanese Zen aesthetics. Using minimal brushwork and extensive empty space, this work creates an atmospheric landscape that exists more in the viewer's imagination than on the paper's surface. The rapidly executed brushwork captures momentary impressions rather than lasting forms, while the painting's apparently unfinished quality invites contemplation of incompleteness as an aesthetic virtue. The work's power emerges from what is suggested rather than explicitly depicted. The composition creates psychological as well as visual space. There's the phrase again. Empty areas don't feel vacant, but pregnant with possibility, allowing viewers to project their own experiences of landscape and weather into the spare framework provided by the artist. This collaborative aspect of viewing reflects the Japanese aesthetic emphasis on the relationship between artwork and audience. Here is a wonderful sentiment expressed by the artist. The ultimate goal of the artist is to use the brush like God uses the wind. Isn't that beautiful? Tohaku's screen painting of pine trees in mist represents one of the purest expressions of Japanese ink painting aesthetics. The work creates an entire forest environment using only gradations of black ink on paper, achieving maximum effect through minimum means. And the painting embodies mono no aware, the pathos of things, through its evocation of specific atmospheric moment, morning mist filtering through pine trees. This transient condition, lasting only minutes in nature, becomes eternal when captured by such an artist, while simultaneously reminding viewers of time's passage. The trees appear and disappear in the mist, like memories or dreams. Here is the other side of the screen. Take a moment with it. The artist Tohaku allows ink washes to flow naturally, creating organic textures that couldn't be achieved through controlled technique. This embrace of unpredictability reflects Japanese aesthetic appreciation for natural processes over human manipulation. Now, I've included a traditional Japanese saying there. The pine teaches silence. The rock teaches stillness. But the mountain teaches the great lesson of being content with what one has. Udamaro's ukiyo-e prints demonstrate how Japanese aesthetics transformed popular art forms, creating works that combine accessibility with sophisticated formal relationships. His portraits of courtesans and geishas find beauty in an urban entertainment kind of district while maintaining traditional Japanese sensitivity to linear grace and compositional harmony. Sort of a combination of the profound with what we might want to call the profane, but in Japanese aesthetics, there's no difference. There's no such thing as profane, really. The work's use of flat color areas and elegant linear rhythms reflects Japanese aesthetic preference for decorative beauty over illusionistic representation. This approach creates images that function both as windows into contemporary life and as autonomous aesthetic objects, demonstrating Japanese ability to find profound beauty in popular culture. Now notice that these three women look like the same woman. In other words, they are almost like what we saw in art that expressed Platonic ideals of universal grace and beauty. So in that vein, I'll offer you a comparison. The three beauties on the left remind me of a work we saw in the previous art brunch, Antonio Canova's Three Graces. As well as what we saw the week before that, Botticelli's Three Graces from the Primavera. So perhaps Eastern aesthetics does overlap in many places, Western aesthetics as well. Well, I'll close by going back to Autumn Grasses and Moonlight, one of my favorite works. And then there is this statement of ukiyo philosophy I think that this work expresses. This floating world, does it exist or is it a dream? It seems real enough, but nothing in it lasts. The Eastern artist does not resist or analyze this ephemeral quality of life, only seeks to flow with it, and in the process, express it powerfully through their art. So I hope some of us this morning experienced some of that flow of life, calming, harmonizing, and hopefully beautifying our morning. Well, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Love to hear your impressions of what you saw. If you have a question, that's fine as well. And if you need me to go back to a slide, I'll do that. But now the floor is open.